Cathy Birman is a very well-known surgeon and a professor, and she's the medical director of NextSense. Cathy, thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here endorsing the Cochlear Implant Living Guidelines project, and it's an honour to be part of the many voices in CIICA. Next slide, please. Our program started in 1984, and we now work with a huge team providing support from 20 centres from Darwin down to Melbourne. And we've provided over 7,000 cochlear implants to over 5,000 people. We're under the auspices of Australia's second oldest charity, now known as NextSense. I'd like to acknowledge our recipients, their families, and our whole team, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where I'm speaking today, the Guringai people. Next slide, please. The development of the Living Guidelines has been able to focus on the whole journey, from awareness to long-term cochlear implant maintenance and everything in between. They provide a benchmark for programs and for cochlear implant users, and this is a wonderful document that will bring about improvements as we measure up to this standard. Next slide, please. The guidelines highlight what we do well, and we should celebrate the wins. What is great about a person's enabled hearing through the cochlear implant and that whole ripple effect that it has on their life. We celebrate the journey and the people who support us along the way. And we celebrate what's great about our cochlear implant programs throughout the world. Next slide, please. For us at NextSense, we've really been doing a lot with advocacy campaigns and education for decades with GPs and audiologists, radio meetings and information days with cochlear implant candidates, their families and their friends. We have a hub and spoke model with multiple centres and outreach, working with 20 surgeons throughout 5 states and territories, and trying to make it easier for users and candidates to access services both acute and long term. We have robust assessment and very much that two-way conversation, trying to set realistic goals and a holistic approach with long-term follow-up and protocols. We're a charity using government funding and donations, and so far we've been able to provide that long-term aftercare without out-of-pocket expense to cochlear implant users. We cater for public and privately funded patients. And we have a big multidisciplinary team, so audiologists, speech pathologists, teachers of the deaf, biomedical engineers, social workers, but we also have access to physios and occupational therapists and some access to psychologists. So we're very much trying to fulfill a lot of what the guidelines have recommended. Next slide, please. We analyse and publish our own cochlear implant users' outcomes, and we use those to actually flag who we might need to check if they need additional mapping, rehabilitation or other issues to try and optimise outcomes for each individual. And our thanks to Sharon Hurt for leading that review. Next slide, please. Of course, even with a service that you're trying to do your absolute best, we're always looking for ways to improve. And the Living Guidelines really help us with this. And I'd like to highlight 3 areas that the guidelines have really flagged for us. Next slide, please. I think we all agree we need adult screening, and Sue and Brian have been advocating this for decades, and we really need to keep campaigning for this also in Australia. Next slide, please. The cochlear implant related quality of life questionnaires, our thanks to Jane Brew and Rachel Attard for their work of this, on this at our organisation, but our thanks to the Living Guidelines, because this really highlighted that we needed to incorporate this into our program, and we're able to get swift approval because of the guidelines. And so it enables us to advocate for better resources, I guess. And we really want hearing-specific quality of life assessments, because you might have a knee replacement in the same year that you have a cochlear implant. And being out of pain really means that you're going to have a much improved quality of life, but that's not specifically due to the cochlear implant. So we really need questionnaires and quality of life assessments that include our hearing-related aspects, as well as the ripple effect that hearing provides throughout our lives. Next slide, please. Australia is a very multicultural country, and this article from the Sydney Morning Herald back in 2014 reported that 40% of people who live in Sydney speak another language at home, and the most common language is Arabic. There's over 250 languages spoken in Sydney, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2021 reported that 27% of our population were born overseas. The most common locations were the UK, India, China, New Zealand, and the Philippines. So we have many languages other than English spoken here in Australia. Next slide, please. So the recommendations from the Living Guidelines that we actually do speech perception testing in people's dominant language really rings true for us in Sydney and throughout Australia. Many people will say that they understand very well in Cantonese, but find it harder when people speak English, or understanding well at home in Arabic. But when we do our speech perception testing, we may well, in fact, be doing two tests. One is speech perception testing of hearing through the cochlear implant, but the second, an English comprehension test. So here I have an example of a cochlear implant user who was delighted with her outcome. And preoperatively, she was getting 0% for sentences in that right ear. And postoperatively, 2 years afterwards, she scored 39% for sentences, which I wouldn't say is a great result. But in fact, when those sentences were translated and presented in Arabic, she was scoring 96%, which much more reflected her delight in her hearing with the cochlear implant. Next slide, please. So the cochlear implant living guidelines really enable us to continue to share great practice throughout the world. It is user-focused, and it enables us to do benchmarking. And so you can actually look at your program that you attend and see if they're providing what the guidelines suggest. And for us as programs, we need to continually improve and provide better and better outcomes. And I think this will really lead to great improvements in outcomes worldwide. Thank you.